Dogs in a kennel cost more than the hotel room, let me tell you. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Piazzo. I'm completely new to this organization. I actually came from, I'm actually a video person, so I'm not completely naive about television broadcasting, but I'm basically a production person. I've shot and edited and I've done some system integration. I'm not an engineer. I can wire a connector. Maybe it takes me 2 or 3 times, but I can solder something together, but that's about it. I can't do components or restoration. So this is all very new to me, and it's really beyond me in terms of getting to the component level of things. But I came to the Early Television Museum and actually the Early Television website because I was working on a project. And so on another level, I'm a little bit intimidated to come before you because really a lot of what I know about what I'm going to talk about, I learned from you guys, from the website and from articles that were published. And I mean, really, this is so this has become kind of a mecca. I can't say I'm not an enthusiast anymore, so I guess I'm going to say I'm becoming an enthusiast, but I'm a techie guy. I love history, and so the history of broadcasting is right up my alley, and I'm probably going to end up collecting old TVs like you all do.
We got a lot.
Is that how you guys? But I'm a newcomer. But let me tell you about the project that brought me here, a Queen's Messenger. And I don't know how many people know what a Queen's Messenger is. Have they heard about it? Ooh, that's interesting. A Queen's Messenger was, and I get to see, let me put my glasses on here. And that's interesting too. A Queen's Messenger was in 1928, September 11th, 1928, General Electric at WGY broadcast what has been known as the first dramatic television broadcast. It was a 40-minute, 2-character, 1-act play, mechanical television production. It was from the WGY radio studios, which was the predecessor to WRGB, which exists today, actually still, Channel 6 RGB in Schenectady. But it was a mechanical television production. It was a 3-camera shoot, and it had a switcher, believe it or not. The production, like I said, was the first dramatic broadcast. It was broadcast over, you probably know this, but they basically took the mechanical video signal and modulated it, I guess that's the word, modulated onto an AM radio signal. And if you wanted to receive this, you actually had to have 2 radios tuned in, one for the audio and one for the video picture. The video picture was attached to, I think maybe you've seen these GE Octagons. I think there were only 5 of them tuned in at the time for the broadcast, but it was still a significant event in broadcasting history. I came to this project, or really I found out about it because I was doing research about sort of the history of broadcasting. My day job is I'm basically the media coordinator for the city of Schenectady. I do all their press conferences and video production and stuff like that. A couple of years ago, we started to think about economic development issues for the city. And one of them was to start a new film commission, a kind of a film development office where we would promote the city for doing film productions, try to attract some, in New York City, it's an $8 billion a year television and film industry. We were trying to attract them. We are 2 hours, 3 hours north of Schenectady. If we can get some of that business up there, it's a really good economic boom for us. So we said, okay, let's start a commission. So I started going around talking to people about, what a film commission, trying to find out if we have crew, if we have the technical resources to do things. And I met a lot of people, and they were really interested, but I met a kind of a younger person who actually grew up all their life in Schenectady. And I told them about it, and they said, well, what does Schenectady have to do with movies and TV? And I said, well, I'm not a native Schenectadian, but I do know we're the home of the General Electric Corporation. And all right, by the turn of the century, Thomas Edison really wasn't connected with GE the way, he was out of the General Electric picture by the turn of the century, but certainly GE's electrical works was founded by him, and certainly Thomas Edison has a little bit of cliche in terms of, the light bulb, the photograph, the motion picture kinetoscope, the motion picture camera, the intermittent mechanism, although we can talk about the French's input of that too. But anyways, there's certainly a long legacy of tradition of invention. General Electric, by the turn of the century and up through the teens and into the 20s, was also very much a large part of their engineering was radio broadcasting. They had a very large radio consulting lab headed by a very famous engineer called E.F.W. Alexanderson. Alexanderson's first major invention was the Alexanderson alternator, which was a huge frequency generator for AM radio. Again, my technical knowledge of exactly what that does, I don't know, but it was a 200 kilowatt transmitter. It was one of the first shipborne Navy transmitters used during the First World War. In fact, the creation of RCA had a lot to do with, and you probably know this also, but it had a lot to do with the United States government after the First World War not wanting radio technology to be in the hands of foreign companies. So they essentially created RCA out of a consortium of General Electric, Westinghouse, American Marconi Company, and some other Westinghouse was involved. But that was kind of spurred through, or was kind of led by General Electric's leadership in radio broadcasting technology at the time. So GE was, there's probably other places in the country too, but GE was, as far as I can see, certainly the Silicon Valley, or one of the major silicon development valleys of engineering that there was in the United States. What I learned, which I really didn't realize, is that also General Electric was really a job shop. If you were an engineer from pretty much anywhere in the world and you needed something engineered, you would go to GE and say, hey, Marconi would come and say, hey, I need antennas for my broadcasting system, and GE would say, okay, we will engineer you antennas. So there was a lot of engineering going on at General Electric that had to do with third parties coming in and asking for their expertise. So they built a huge research and development laboratory structure and things like that for General Electric. I love the blimp, by the way. It's like they used to moor the blimps there. So I started doing this research because I said, okay, I'm going to do, if we're going to do a website for this film commission, we need to do sort of a history of broadcasting. Let's do a little section of our website to show people, what the history of broadcasting. WRGB television, which is W2XB, was one of the first television broadcasting experimental stations that actually broadcast a regular schedule of programming. That was started in Schenectady and is still there. WRGB became, first it was NBC, of course, because RCA and General Electric, but then it was sold to CBS, but it's still CBS 6, it's called WRGB. The first television demonstration. This is a little bit later than the project I'm working on, but in 1930, Alexanderson had engineered a television projector. And so in 1930, this was considered the first public demonstration of television, they called it in the world, in Schenectady. It happened at Proctor's Theater. This is Proctor's Theater now. It was also built in the 1920s. 20s it was roaring 20s in Schenectady at that time. There were, I don't know how many, 20 to 30,000 GE workers. It was a major city in the capital region. Proctor's is now fully restored. That's the way it looks like today. It's a beautiful theater. It was built in the late 20s, and this is where they first did the demonstration. It's 1930, I think it was in May. They did a video projection. This was a video projector designed by Alexanderson. They had a 6-foot projector screen, full amplification sound system. They did a remote broadcast. They set up in the GE engineering lab, which is about half mile away. They put the conductor for the orchestra, and he did a remote conducting of the orchestra, which is in the orchestra pit in front of them. They also had a vaudeville comedian that did a comedy act between a live person and another person being broadcast on stage. It was, I don't know, maybe 60 lines or something, again, a mechanical television broadcast. It was pretty crude. Little people were a little disappointed at the image quality, but it was certainly a success. Alexanderson's real, I think, motivation was they were really looking at trying to figure out if they could put television or video inside of theaters. I mean, they were really seriously looking at theatrical. Here's the projector. Now, what's interesting about this projector is it no longer exists, but it is based upon a standard follow spot that theater used at the time. So this is a large arc lamp, and they built the mechanical television sections onto it. It was quite a machine. The Nikov's disc, that's right, the disc is inside here, and those are all the optics. And this is the high intensity arc. I guess the major development of this was actually there was a light valve here, and it was a magnetic light valve because it was capable of withstanding the heat of the arc lamp, and that was the way they were able to project a bright enough picture, because mechanical television was using these neon lamps, but they weren't certainly bright enough to project. But this mechanical valve opened up and closed this bright arc light. We still have in Proctor's one of these original arc light projectors. There was a follow spots, just of course the mechanics are no longer there. A year and a half prior to this big production, and it's interesting, that 1930 presentation, I watched you could probably watch a Steve Jobs movie, the recent one. I mean, that was, GE really was already doing these large public demonstrations of technology. They were a big PR machine. They had, thousands of they photographed everything. They documented everything. They were very aware of publicity and how to promote their technologies. So this dramatic broadcast was really something that they were trying to promote their technologies with. And they wanted something unique and interesting. Our idea, really where we came to that, is when we found, so this is 1928, this is about a year and a half, it's the end of 28 September, and that television demonstration was in May of 1930. So there's a year in between, and also a stock market crash and a depression starting, so that was an interesting economic thing. But here's the multi-camera shoot, here's the Octagon television receiver. There's two cameras that that you can see here, but there was actually three cameras. Because they couldn't move the cameras, and here's let me see if I can get this to go. Here's a little video of, can you go? There it goes, a video. This was actually obviously shot afterwards. It was shot on motion picture film. This is the production that they did. They weren't able to move the cameras, so they had static. So they actually had only two characters in the play, but they used four people. They did close-ups of the two characters, and then they had two people who would do the close-up of the objects, like a gun or a cigarette in the story that would show up, and they would cut to the close-ups of the thing. So someone says, "I have a gun," and then they would cut to the close-up of the gun, and it was a live switch. So they had a 3-switcher, and that was just sort of getting around the mechanical parts of it. The Queen's Messenger play. So here, let me just sort of understand what the project is, because I didn't really explain it. So we decided what we were going to do for the publicity of kind of bringing this new film commission to the public was we thought we'd try to do some kind of event. We do a lot of press conferences, and I said, let's try to do something different. Why don't we recreate this broadcast? Why don't we take the original play and the circumstances around it and redo the play and figure out, maybe write another story that's based on the history and recreate sort of the dramatization of the rehearsal of the play and how they come to kind of decide to do the play, and make it an event, make it a live event, and be a very kind of cool thing to introduce the public to the history of broadcasting, at least in Schenectady. We found the original play. It's called The Queen's Messenger. And it's a 2-character play. It's about 40 minutes. The messenger is a British Army officer, a diplomatic courier carrying top-secret documents to his queen. The evening he is to depart for London, a beautiful, seductive woman, a Russian spy, invites him to her home and drugs him with opium-laced cigarettes in an attempt to steal the letters he carries. When the messenger awakes, he is so devastated to find that he has failed in his mission and duty that he attempts to kill himself. big dramatic story. But an interesting one. What I actually kind of thought was kind of interesting in Mike's presentation about facsimile, Alex Anderson was working on radio fax also. GE was trying to do facsimile. I thought, that's kind of interesting story idea if you're trying to promote fax. Because if you were it's certainly sending a document wirelessly at that time was probably a much more secure way than putting a letter in somebody's pocket. So I'm sure they must have thought a little bit about the kind of play that they were doing and what they wanted to promote. We do that in TV all the time now as we're posting. But this was the actual play. So we've got a whole little play and actually have some actors that are working on rehearsing and learning to play. Here's the characters involved. We have W. Alex Anderson. This is a promotional picture. Zetta Jewell, who was a Broadway actress, and Maurice Randall, which is another actor from WGY, and Mortimer Stewart, who was turned out to be the director. I started looking into these characters, but I said, if we're going to write a story around these personalities and characters, let's find out a little bit more about them. In the press accounts, it says Zetta Jewell, former Broadway star, was in this, and that was about it. There wasn't very much about her. I started looking to her because I thought this was a very interesting, dramatic thing to point out. We have the inventor of the artist, and how something as technical as a television demonstration comes together with something so artistic as a theatrical presentation. And Schenectady, you have to understand, Schenectady at the time was really an innovative center. We had Alco. It was known as the city that lights and halls the world. We had Union College, which was a big engineering school at the time. And Union College had a large theater department. They started a civic theater in the 1920s. WGY Dramatic Players was already doing regular dramatic radio broadcasting. They have been said to be one of the earliest innovators of radio special effects. Sound effects. The old with the sound effects. So they were one of the first radio groups to use effects. So there was a large creative artistic community. A lot of them married to very technical and highly trained scientists. So we had this really kind of social mix of the 20s and Prohibition and all this thing going on in this one little place, and a lot of these things bumped together. Actually, even Alex Anderson said, and quoted in one of his papers, he says, engineering should be considered a creative art. And he was very much interested in how engineering and scientific research should be looked upon as much as a creative and how things worked as it was just a technical exercise. So I thought these two characters would be interesting to focus on. So we just kind of their background. So I started looking into Zetta Jewell, and I'll go quick because Zetta Jewell's thing is a whole nother thing. Zetta Jewell was a popular Broadway star for like 15 years. She started when she was 15 years old, and she basically was on the stage until she was like 30. She was so beautiful, they said at one time she had 40 marriage proposals that she had to decide who to marry. She eventually married a West Virginia U.S. senator in his 60s, quite a bit older than her, and she retired from the stage. 2 years later, he dies and leaves her $4 million. Which, in the this was 1918, significant amount of money. She went on to be a very prominent person in the suffragette movement and the women's right to vote movement. She was the first woman to run for U.S. Senator. She was very popular. She traveled all over the world. She went to China. She was an activist and an advocate in addition to being a wealthy woman. But she also, she was involved in the Farm Bureau, and she organized Farm Bureau women's groups and farm bureaus all over the country. And she got a lot of accolades in Washington for that. And she eventually went to Washington. She did this for many years. In 1923, she eventually meets a Union College engineering professor, civil engineering, and marries him, and that's how she gets to Schenectady. This time she's probably in her late 30s, early 40s, but she had an amazing career up until that point. This is another funny, this is a little bit later, But she actually, this later on, and this was probably in the late 30s, she actually flew 10,000 miles around the country in this biplane with another female flyer, campaigning for Roosevelt. She was a big Roosevelt supporter. And this is a very famous female pilot, Phoebe Umley. She was one of Amelia Earhart's contemporaries. They used to race together, and this is Izetta Jewell too. Amazing career, an amazing woman that was involved in this production. She got involved in WGY radio when she moved to Schenectady. She found herself in Schenectady. She had a daughter at that time, and she wanted something creative to do, and there really wasn't that much stage, so she got involved in the dramatization of the radio broadcast. And that's, I think, how she connected up with this television production, because it eventually got produced within the radio confines of the radio thing. She gets involved with Broadway. She goes on to adapt many prestigious radio plays. She becomes the Commissioner of Public Welfare during the Depression. She restarts her radio career. She was a National Association of Women in Broadcasting, one of the founders. She died in her 90s doing radio. Amazing character. Ernst Alexanderson, this is the alternator. He's a major figure in engineering and broadcasting, in radio in particular. He died in his 90s, late 80s, with 350 patents. He becomes the consulting engineer when GE and RCA. When RCA got basically GE's radio patents in the 1920s, Alexanderson was head of RCA's engineering. They were a combined engineering group, and he was the main consulting engineer. During the 1920s, really up until the 30s, half of General Electric's radio consulting budget was coming from RCA. And there's letters that I've researched, but as you went along, as Sarnoff rose through the ranks of RCA and television and broadcasting became more and more of a priority in RCA, there was an awful lot of competition among vendors for RCA who would get research dollars. So a lot of the television research, I believe, that Alexanderson had been working on was really driven and helped to support what was literally half of the budget that was coming into GE at the time. He had a lot of interesting television theories, and I've read a lot of their later papers. And in addition to actual television, he wasn't necessarily focused, I don't think, Alexanderson, on broadcasting to homes. He had, I read a proposal where he was proposing, this was in 1928, of putting television cameras inside of airplanes for the military, and said, well, we can then fly those airplanes remotely and drop bombs without risking the lives of our pilots. He was thinking those types of uses of technology and television at the time. Here's an interesting letter, and let me read it because it's just a great letter. It's to Sarnoff from Alexanderson. It says, although you were undoubtedly very busy since your return from Europe, I hope you can find time to come to Schenectady for a day or perhaps a weekend to see our developments in television. This work has already branched out in so many directions that all concerned would appreciate to get your opinion on what features will have the best commercial prospects. A definitive program, I would suggest that you plan to come up here and stay overnight with me at my summer house in Lake George. Besides having a swim and possibly some sailing, you will be able to witness television reception from Schenectady on a teleopticon attached to a Radiola 18. In the laboratory, we would like to show you television of a boxing match produced on the screen a foot square by a new process which appears more practical than the Carolus system, and adapted for the home as well as for the theater. He was really promoting GE's laboratory research. To Sarnoff, they were really trying to maintain their connection with RCA at the time. This was I just threw this in because I thought you'd think. This is actually Alexanderson writing to a guy named Parker in New Jersey, and he says, we are anxious to purchase a Bayard television kit as soon as one becomes available. I understand a few of these kits have been purchased in New York by certain people, but I have not been able to determine whether One can be purchased direct from England or by a representative from this country. They wanted to take a look at Bayard's mechanical television kit, which is kind of interesting. Here's the GE Octagon TV. This is the one that's actually currently in Schenectady's museum in their archive collection. This is a picture I took of it. I went and visited it. It was like, a piece of gold. Here's actually the original publicity photo of it, and that's it sitting in storage. I have to admit, now you're talking to me collectors, I just bought a radio 51 on my way down here. A guy had it in Craigslist, and he was in, I don't know, Meadville or something. So on our way down, we actually went 50 miles out of the way to get a radio. So now I have a radio 51, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to ever get an Octagon.
Build one.
But I could build one, absolutely. Which comes to this, and here's Mortimer Stewart. Now, really quick with Mortimer. Mortimer Stewart said he had teleoptical actors, and this would be a teleoptodrama. What's interesting is a 3-page letter from him that really describes the creation of a switcher, and how this whole 24 system would work. And I don't have much more information with him, but he seemed to be driving a lot of at least configuration of how it was thing. He was the director of this, and he was the one who insisted on a switcher, which I thought was kind of unique and interesting. There's a picture of the switcher. Now let me get it where I'm getting at, because I don't want to get two things. We're going to do a reproduction of this play. Well, I need props, right? So one part of the research is we need to somehow recreate these props so they can be on stage and we can see them. Of course, being a technical person, I'm also saying to myself, well, if we're going to recreate the props, could they actually work? And that's I don't know. But the idea of actually creating a 3-camera mechanical system like this is amazing and interesting. Here's the camera, and I've already learned something being here. I always assumed this was simply a light, and there's the camera there, and the light, there would be a light source that was coming from the camera and there was a light on the subject, and then there would be a photo cell behind the lens that was picking up. I guess that's not the way it worked. It went the opposite. That this is actually a photo cell, and the light's being scanned onto the actor. These high-resolution shots are really nice. There's another shot. You can see the camera in the background and the optical. That's where they're doing the close-ups. So this is what the production looks like. And this is the way we're kind of, and we get another little surprise guy. So we got the original play, plus a new story which is being written now that basically kind of recreates the rehearsal of the play and how it would happen. And I'm kind of assuming Mortimer, and it's written in some diaries from Izetta Jewell, he rehearsed these people like endlessly for a week, to the point where they were so pissed at him because he was like making them getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to rehearse this play. Then they show up on set and they're told they have to sit in a chair and not move. Because basically you couldn't walk around the set because the cameras couldn't move. So there must have been a very interesting dynamic of the rehearsing of the thing, and then having these technical wizards come in with all this equipment and say, okay, you have to stand there, don't move. We can't do close-ups without these close-up people. So that's actually stage production. We've already talked to proctors about possibly doing this on the stage, and we'll probably have some on-stage projection. So we're going to try to tie this all in together with proctors. My imagination of this would really be if we were to create, and I think we can either do it one way or the other, but we have a 3-camera setup that's being switched on live stage. I would love to stream that as a separate event. So you would actually be able to watch, say, on your cell phone in the state. You watch the actual production, and then you would watch a miniaturized version of what the cameras would be seeing. I know it's kind of hard to think, but and that's where I'm trying to figure out how to technically do. Murray Mercier, I saw his story on the website. You all know him. He was a local Ohio. There needed to be a narrator to this story that could actually tell the story maybe of the history of the technology. So I'm just using his as an example, but I think we're thinking of doing like a on-stage narrator who would actually, narrate the production. We would have some documentary footage that would go along, so it's an educational kind of thing, and he would kind of be the Greek chorus that they call it on the stage, but he would be there to tell you what's happening and bridge it. And I thought it would be really cool if it was an older kind of, television repairman who's telling you the history of television. Although as a young boy, it might be really cool to start out with as a young boy to do it. So that's the project. But I'm actually asking you all to think about it, those things. How could we do? We've got these props, which I have a budget for, and which we can, of course, create. But they would either be empty boxes or something's got to go in them. My idea, if you couldn't do a mechanical thing, was here's Blackmagic's new 4K miniature studio camera. Talk about the difference in sizes. This thing's this big, 4K, interchangeable lenses. Would be actually just to put working television, current technology inside the boxes, and do it that way. Lomography, for instance, even though if you looked at the lenses, lomography has this reproduction daguerreotype brass lens that they're producing with a micro 4/3 mount that actually fits on that. So that could be an interesting technological combination. Just in terms of fundraising, if you want to talk about, they've raised $790,000 to build this lens in about a month. So crowdfunding is an interesting way to raise money, Kickstarter is. I don't know if you know lomography, which is not going to the next thing. Why is it not going to the next thing? Did I kill it?
Daryl, help.
Oh yeah. Lomography does. They're an analog film, and they sell analog cameras and analog film. They're kind of doing this. There's a big analog revolution to a certain extent in film these days. They make a reproduction Polaroid today, and they're actually trying to sell Polaroid film. They sell kits, and it struck me when I saw this. This is kind of like the kits of TV. They sell a kit where you put together a 35 millimeter camera from plastic parts. Wouldn't it be cool if you could actually make a modern reproduction mechanical TV kit somehow, maybe through lomography, because maybe they'd be interested in expanding into something like that. Ideas. It looks like pretty much my time is up, but here, I just love this picture. Here's Alexanderson with his family, and he's at his home, which is in Schenectady still, and that's one of, I guess you guys have a reproduction or one of those, I guess it's a 60-line GE mechanical television there. There's a Radiola 28 in the back, and that's a Radiola 104 speaker. His son was actually kidnapped in 1923, like Lindbergh's son. And they did the first Amber Alert on WGY radio looking for his son. They did an announcement across the radio broadcast that his son was missing, and they eventually found his son because of that radio broadcast. So there's a whole linkage of things that are very interesting. But I don't want to run too much out of time. I don't have anything. There's a back of the 60-line set. Any other interesting pictures? There's a diagram of how the broadcasts on the Proctor's worked. That's the mechanical radio news, as Murray's saying. And that's one heck of a laboratory, let me tell you. That's one heck of a laboratory. But anyways, I'm interested in people's feedback about particularly about the mechanical possibilities and whether there is something we could do, or even how you could actually simulate that pattern from a regular normal. How could you maybe convert an actual modern video signal into something that looked like a 60 scan line thing. But besides that, I can answer questions in 30 minutes, but I'll be here for the rest of the thing if anybody wants to talk about it. Thank you.
Joe, that sounded good.
Does it sound good?
Can I be in your play?
You can be my play. He could play Murray.
Okay.
If you want to come to Schenectady, you're welcome. Thank you.
Come on, gang. Listen, we've got 3 more. James O'Neill's going to talk about the VCR history. Then Mark Nelson's going to talk about signal boosters.
One of the members here, Aurora, makes a converter that takes